This is Grandma, and I am reading Snow Treasure, starting a new book. You know, a lot of times you hear people say, don't judge a book by its cover. And you know what they mean is pretty true. Don't judge a person by how they look. But in this case, we are going to judge this book by the cover. I want you to look at the cover of this book, if I can get it to where it doesn't have so much gloss on it, and let's see if we can figure out what this book is going to be about. Well, first of all, what do we see? We see snow, so that helps with our setting. We know that it takes place in the winter. We also can see that there are soldiers, and the soldiers look like they're from World War II. So I'm going to guess that these are soldiers in Europe during World War II. And we see that the title of the book is Snow Treasure. So that tells us that they're going to either find some treasure in the snow or there's treasure that's somehow involved with snow. We also can see that there are children in this, and the children are playing on sleds. And if you look very closely, you'll see there's actually two groups of soldiers. So perhaps these children are also kind of being watched by the soldiers. Then right here, we read that it is a story of courage and adventure. So who do you think the story is going to be about? Do you think it's going to be about the children, or is it going to be about the soldiers? Courage and adventure kind of tells me that it's not really going to be about the soldiers, that it's going to be about the children who are showing courage and adventure. Now, normally, I also will show you the back, and we'll read the back, and I will thumb through the book, and we'll read the introduction here, but this time we're not going to do that because it gives away too much information. Snow Treasure by Marie McSwigan, Chapter 1. Beat you to the turn. Peter Lundstrom shot his sled down the long, steep slope. No fair, you started first, his friend Michael Berg protested. Nevertheless, he flew along in Peter's tracks. School was over for the day, at least, and Peter and Michael were enjoying one of the sled rides the children of Norway never seem to tire of. Well, now we have a really good idea where this book takes place. It takes place in Norway. At the turn, they paused for breath, but the rest was short, for Peter spied another sled. Look out! Here come the girls! With that, he headed down another slope, his friend behind him. Peter was 12 and felt grown up. Playing with girls was something he meant never to do. Heavy clothes hid all but his yellow hair and his face. His eyes were clear and brown, wide apart and in an even line. They looked untroubled. Michael, the same age, seemed different in everything else. While Peter was tall and slender, Michael was square. His hair was like tow, which is a very white blonde, and his eyes were that bright blue that is often called typical Scandinavian. So let's talk about Scandinavia. Scandinavia is a group of countries in north of main Europe, what we think of as Germany and France and Netherlands. Consists of 4 countries: Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. And they are in a group of peninsulas to some extent. Denmark, not so much. Denmark is right there next to Germany. But they speak Scandinavian language, which is a form of German. English is also. English, the Scandinavian languages, and German are all very related. They were all settled by similar kinds of people. Michael, the same age, seemed different in everything else. While Peter was tall and slender, Michael was square. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Michael was shorter and maybe wider to make him square. Okay, reading on. Hey, wait a minute! A dark-eyed girl drove her sled into the place the boys had just left. Her black curls bobbed like sausages under the cherry red of her hood. She was Helga Thompson, and somewhat of a tomboy. Behind her on the same sled was a smaller girl, fair as Helga was dark. The smaller girl was Lovisa, Peter's 10-year-old sister. "We'll catch them at the lookout. Hold on." Helga dug her heels into the snow and began another swift descent. Catching them at the lookout they did, for the sled track made a sharp twist, and below that, nearly 1,000 feet, lay the sea. Peter and Michael had to slow down to avoid crashing a wall that protected the road. Helga, daring as any boy, drove straight at them, so there was a clamor of yells and a tangle of windbreakers, caps, sweaters, and mittens. There never had been such a winter for snow. It began early, and with each month grew higher and higher on the ground. April was like January, with no sign of thaw. From one end of Norway to the other, people talked of nothing else. They only stopped talking about it when something entirely terrifying drove it from their minds. Then they remembered it again and looked to it for help in their trouble. Up in the Arctic Circle, where these children lived, it was winter for much of the year. Sleds and skis were used for travel for all but a few months. But accustomed as the people were to the long, cold, and white stillness, the winter of 1940 surpassed anything even the oldest could remember. So now we have another important piece of information. It's 1940, and they are above the Arctic Circle, which is very cold indeed. So the children use sleds and skis as people in the United States use what? Children in the United States use what? Maybe skateboards, bicycles, scooters. But when you have snow, as my grandchildren in Minneapolis often do, then they learn to use skis, and they learn to use snowshoes, and they use sleds. Okay, continuing. The mountains seemed asleep that April. Along the sea, the world was lifeless, except for the fjords. The harbors here in the north were ice-blocked, their channels great fields of white. The fjords alone seemed alive with their black rushing water and bobbing ice cakes. These forceful streams flow too fast for freezing, and so are always a highway to the open sea. The four friends at the lookout continued their lively play. Peter and Michael tried to wash Helga's face, but the snow was too hard and dry, and the face washing could hardly have been called successful. Helga managed to get a handful of snow down Peter's back, and that did amount to something, for he had a bit of trouble shaking it out to prevent the discomfort of it melting. Tired of the tussle, the four squatted on their sleds. When Michael idly tossed a lump of snow in Helga's lap, she got up to shake her dress. In doing so, she turned toward the sea. "Why, Peter, there's your Uncle Victor," she was surprised. "And Rawls, his mate, look." "Oh, you're crazy." Peter didn't bother to get up. "But it is your Uncle Victor, honest. Now, what in the world would he be doing here? You don't suppose he's fishing this time of the year, do you?" "But it is, Peter, come see." She was so sure about it that he got up, if only to be able to tell her she was wrong. Below, miles away by road, but only a little distance for a stone, Uncle Victor was making footprints in the hard snow. Behind him was the stocky figure of Rolls, second in command of the Landstrom fishing fleet. "Yoo-hoo, Uncle Victor!" Lovisa was on her feet and looking out over the wall of the lookout, but she could not make him hear. And we have a picture of the children trying to get Victor's attention. And we have a picture here of a fjord. What do you think a fjord is? Well, a fjord is a little bit like a river, but it's also a little bit like the ocean. And it is a widened area that goes right out to the sea. So with mountains on either side. It's very scenic to take a cruise through the fjords of Norway. Yoo-hoo! The four of them yelled in chorus, cupping their hands to make the sound carry further. Then Victor Lundstrom heard them and looked up. But there was no great roar of greeting the children had expected. He only waved his arm and went on walking. Rawls saw them too and gave an equally casual salute. Peter scowled. The greeting was unlike Uncle Victor. Why, he should have been overjoyed to see them, especially after a long trip. He was Peter's favorite relative and in all truth his hero. He led a life of adventure in contrast with Peter's father, a banker. He was one of the most successful fishermen in that land of able fishers. He had a whole fleet of boats and sailed about everywhere, his nephews supposed. When he came back from a voyage, he had stories to tell that no one could match. Uncle Victor was so fond of his brother's children as they were of him, so it wasn't like him not to seem glad to see them. What's he doing here? Michael wanted to know. They watched him walk along the beach toward the cliff beyond Risvik Fjord. He's on the way to the snake, they decided. The snake was a tiny arm of the big fjord, so twisted and narrow that it deserved its name. Unless you knew about the snake, you never would have guessed it was there, almost entirely hidden by cliffs. Even from the air, it would be hard to trace. To the Kling Persson! Lovisa's eyes danced, for the Kling Persson was Uncle Victor's own fishing boat, the one that he alone might sail. The children were permitted aboard only as a special treat. But why is he here? Peter pondered. He never comes north until the ice is gone. But he had no time for further reflection when a snowball broke in his face. So you thought I was crazy, Helga taunted. Crazy as a hare? Michael's snowball landed on Helga's hood. It spattered and her eyes and face were white. She lowered her head and shook it from side to side like a fierce young animal, and then she charged at her tormentors. Meanwhile, Lovisa had not been idle. Her fast-moving mittens were busy rolling hard pellets of snow. Then she stood back and hurled with all her strength and all the skills she'd been able to acquire by watching and imitating the boys since she was old enough to remember. Helga and Peter were locked in a tussle when Lovisa came to her friend's rescue. One swift ball caught Peter on the ear and he turned, surprised to see who his assailant might be. Then Michael brought up a hatful of snow to give Helga another face washing, but Lovisa's ball caught him so abruptly he stumbled and fell. Come, Helga, let's get out of here while we're on top. Lovisa believed in securing her victories. She preferred not to chance a smashing defeat by remaining. But Helga parted her feet in a defiant stance and stood ready to meet all comers. What do you want to run away for? She jeered at Lovisa. I should think anyone who could hit as hard as you would be glad to stay and fight it out. Here was high tribute. It came from one who was not only older, but was a recognized leader among the girls of Risvik. Lovisa glowed in the praise, but that did not stop her busy mittens. They were piling many rounds of ammunition on Helga's sled. Look out! Helga warned just in time to prevent Peter stealing the sled and all the snowballs. So Peter got the first of Lovisa's bullets and had to stand crossfire when Helga opened from the other side. And so the battle went on. The boys, for all their strength and size, did not seem able to subdue the quick-witted girls, and none of them seemed to tire of the brisk exchange of snow. Good glory, it's getting dark. Peter was first to realize that the afternoon was over. Absorbed in the fight, the four of them failed to note the passing time. We're all going to be late for supper and we'll get what's coming to us. What that was, he didn't have to explain, for they all understood it was no pleasant prospect. Come on, let's get out of here. There was a scramble for sleds, caps, mittens, and even sweaters that had been discarded as the battle grew hot. Then began the long climb up the mountain to Risvik, the town that stood on a level shelf on the mountain slope. As Peter predicted, he and Lovisa were late for their evening meal. But what's coming to us never came. Their father was busy with his own thoughts, and their mother could always be counted on to keep peace in the family, especially when Mr. Lundstrom was home. When they told of seeing Uncle Victor, a strange thing happened. What do you think that was? Their father pushed back his chair, jumped up from the table. Peter and Lovisa were surprised because they had never before seen him leave a meal unfinished. My hat and coat, Per Garson, he called to the old family servant. Victor's back from Oslo. I've got to go out. Per Garson entered with a coffee and all but dropped the tray. Why is he so surprised? Because he also can see that the father, Mr. Lundstrom, is leaving before he's eating his dinner. Where is he going? Probably to see his brother Victor. What do you think is going on with his brother Victor? Remember, the children were very surprised when Victor did not greet them after his long trip. Well, we'll find out in the next chapter. Bye-bye.